once again, for the record, I am strongly of the opinion that these men, and they are all men, who participated in the caucus room conspiracy and continue to this day, none of these men should be made Speaker of the House of Representatives, because I believe that they have committed treason. Maybe not the kind of treason that is elevated to the level of, prosecution or firing squad or whatever, not that kind of, but a political, a moral treason, let's say. They have violated the spirit of this country. James Madison in Federalist 10 warned us about the power of faction. Faction was defined as a group of people who represent a special interest that is contrary to the interests of the nation. The Republican Party is the only political party in the world that denies global climate change. Why? Because they have become a faction. They are not all, actually not all Republicans. There are a few Republicans who actually acknowledge climate change, but institutionally the party does not, or at least it seems so. And I would say it's because of the influence of big money. I mean, the Koch brothers are going to spend, $900 million in this election, almost $1 billion in this election. It's all going to go to Republicans. And the Koch brothers inherited an oil dynasty from Daddy, from Fred Koch. So if you're looking at $900 million, to get your hands on some of that money, all you have to do is say climate change doesn't exist. That's easy. So, number one, the entire party is corrupt. And not just on the issue of climate change. I mean, the same thing with pharmaceuticals, the same thing with GMOs, the same thing. You name an industry that passes money out to politicians, and the Republicans are at the front of the line with their hand out. And then they're at the front of the line to pass legislation to help that industry. But within the Republican Party, there's an even deeper cancer, and that's the so-called Tea Party cancer, the so-called Freedom Caucus cancer. And the most visible manifestation of that is the caucus room conspiracy, where these men got together and basically swore an oath to each other that they would block anything that this president did. No legacy for Barack Hussein Obama. No legacy. This, and just as evidence of this, when George W. Bush, in the last year of George W. Bush's presidency, there were 5 pieces of consequential legislation that had to do with trying to put the economy back together, right? The 2008 stimulus, bailing out Bear Stearns, bailing out AIG, the Bush-Cheney TARP in September of 2008, and the second Bush-Cheney TARP, Toxic Asset Reduction Program or whatever, where they're basically buying bad financial instruments at the banks. Basically, you and I, with our tax dollars, bought from the banks this phony baloney stuff that they had been selling to pension funds and stuff to keep it from totally destroying the world. And the second one was the second Bush-Cheney TARP in October of 2008. Bush and Cheney also asked for Congress to provide them with money for 2 different wars. And they asked them to cut $4 trillion off the taxes of the top 1%. The people who voted in favor of all those Bush-Cheney initiatives included Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, Pete Sessions, Jeb Henseling, Pete Hoekstra, Dan Lundgren, Jim DeMint, John Kyle, Tom Coburn, John Ensign, and Bob Corker. Now, what do these guys have in common? They're all members of the caucus room conspiracy. In other words, they were fine voting for stimulus bills. They were fine voting for bailout bills. They were fine voting for TARP. They were fine voting for wars when a Republican was in the White House. As soon as President Obama became president, Jim DeMint, John Kyle, Tom Coburn, John Ensign, and Bob Corker in the Senate, the senators who were there, filibustered over 300 pieces of legislation. That's more bills being filibustered by the Senate than any time in the history of the United States. They voted no on every one, two, three, four, these 5 men, DeMint, Kyle, Coburn, Ensign, and Corker, voted no on every piece of legislation brought to the floor, including they voted no on Al Franken's anti-rape amendment. They voted no on the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. They voted no on the Fair Pay Act. They voted no on an anti-outsourcing bill that Nancy Pelosi got through the House. On the House side, the people who voted no, now they were all in favor of FEMA when George W. Bush was trying to deal with Katrina. But when President Obama came in and we needed FEMA for natural disasters, guess who voted no? No to FEMA. Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, Pete Sessions, Jeb Hensel, and Pete Hoekstra, Dan Lundgren. These same people. These men have put party above country over and over and over for 6.5 years. Kevin McCarthy is one of the ringleaders, and he has no place in the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives.